Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me today are Chrissie Colmery.
Good to be with you guys.
And Carolina Ortiz.
Hello.
Some good friends and longtime friends, actually. We won't even go into that, but both of our families and mine, and I think people that, if you've been around for any amount of time, a number of you know, but I'm excited to get to invite them to share a little bit about what God's been doing in the midst of our church family, in the context of your homes. I think sometimes when we think about what God's doing in our church broadly, we think about, external programs or, things that that end up on a church website. And we think less and less about the things that he's doing and the ways that he's working powerfully and actually showing himself overwhelmingly faithful in our homes. And I know that both of you have had a interesting number of years, let alone an interesting year this past year. And would love just to get an opportunity to today talk a little bit about the Lord's faithfulness in the midst of that. What for those that don't know either of you or your stories, why don't you give us just a little bit of background on you and the makeup of your families?
Okay. I'll go first. I'm
Okay.
Chrissie, and I'm married to Brian. We'll be married 12 years at the 21st of this month. And we have 5 children. 2 of them are biological. One's my oldest is Quinn, who's 10, and she's in 4th grade. Weston is 8 in 2nd grade. And then we have 3 children that we adopted through foster care, which is Olivia, who is in kinder. Caroline is 5. Olivia's 6. Caroline's 5. She's in preschool. And Ben is almost 2. And the 3 of them share a biological parent, but we did not get them all at the same time.
Or didn't even foresee that.
No, we fostered Livy first, our oldest foster adopt. And then a year later on her birthday, her sister was born, who was baby girl at the time. We named her Caroline. So since we had Olivia with us and we were active foster parents, we got the call to take her, and we did. And then all was quiet for a while, and Mom was stable, and we assumed we were done. And for some reason, we could not finalize Caroline's adoption. We just couldn't get through the red tape. Things kept going wrong. We were foster parents way longer than we intended to. And then the baby boy was born. That's Ben, and we finalized him in September.
So that's even a piece of news, right?
Yeah.
Right? That happened this year.
Yes.
But less climactically, I think, than you would normally. You guys just got a call.
We actually didn't get a call.
You didn't even get a call.
I turned in the paperwork, and I hadn't heard from them in a while. And my social worker said, you can probably just follow up with them because they won't tell me if it happened or not. So I called the court, and they're like, oh, who is it? Wait, hang on, let me check. And then I listened to the music for a while, and she's like, oh yeah, he finalized yesterday. And I was like, oh,
by the way.
So
by the way, your son's adopted.
I hadn't had a shower that day. He was filthy with whatever snack and I was like, yay, we're adopted. There were no pictures, nothing. So, in the middle of quarantine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. I mean, that's it's crazy in quarantine style as that is. That
Yes.
is exciting to have all 3 of them finalized.
Yes. And I should have mentioned that as soon as we did finalize, I called my social worker and I told her to decertify our family. So we are not active at this moment. We are a closed family right now. So
she actually made that call before she called Brian to say no. All right. And Carolina.
Yes. So I'm married to Dan. We've been married for 11 years, and we have 3 children. Sammy is 10, and Joel is 8. They're both our biological sons. And Maddie came to us when she was 7 weeks old, also through the foster care system. And we had her for a couple of months, and then she was reunified to family, extended family. We got the call, and basically were told, she's going to family this afternoon. And I called Dan, who was at work, and I said, baby girl's leaving. And so he rushed home and we spent time with her. And then, of course, we get a call back. Actually, she's not leaving today.
Hmm.
So that's just the way the story goes. She did leave us 2 days later. She was gone for 3 days. And then we get a call. Do you have an open bed? And we said, no, we are still hurting from
Yeah.
Maddie leaving. We are not
Mm.
ready to
It
open up
was
our
3
home.
days.
Wow.
3 days, 3 days.
gosh.
She was gone. Do you have an open bed? And we said, no, we're still really recovering. Our children are sad about it. We are just brokenhearted. And they said, well, the bed's for her. So, okay, she's coming back. And this time around, I felt like the first time, we accepted, we were super excited. The second time when they called us to take her, we were a little bit more informed. We were a little bit more careful. We asked more questions. And so we said, what does it mean? Do you have any family that she could go to then? It's really hard for our family to have this back and forth. So we would really want to know what's going to happen with her before we kind of put our kids through the ringer again. And they said, right now, this was the only family that we had identified who could take her. We don't have anyone else. And as far as we're concerned, she should be with you. And the biological family that she was with also believes that they should be with you. She should be with you. They're very overwhelmed with her half brother, who they were finalizing at the moment, and their own biological children and caring for their elderly parents. And so, of course, we said yes, 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 yes. And 3 days later, so she was gone a total of 6 days. 3 days later, we were able to meet up and take her back. And so we got a chance to foster her for 2 years total. And then we finalized just after her second birthday. And at that point, we were feeling pretty overwhelmed. Our two boys are on the autism spectrum, and they come with a whole set of challenges. And Maddie was also displaying some special needs as well. And we thought, this is probably about where we should stop. So we decertified too. We're like, we're good for now. Maybe later, but we are good for now. So that's kind of our family makeup.
And how old's Maddie now?
Maddie is turning 4.
Oh my gosh.
So I know in 2 weeks.
Crazy. So I want to get in a little bit to the just unique nature of navigating your homes this year in the midst of everything. But before we do that, can you tell just I know it's not a brief story, but can you tell just a brief version of how you got involved in foster adoption in the first place?
Mhm. I can go first. I got into it for a very self-serving reason, which was to grow my family. And I started kind of considering adoption before I was even married. And because I got married older, the selfish part of me is like, well, what if I can't have kids? How do I have kids? So it was a very self-serving reason. But as soon as Brian and I actually talked it through, we decided the best way to go forward was to educate ourselves. So I started reading everything: blogs, books, listened to podcasts, articles, and we went to a faith-based conference in the Valley and visited basically every breakout we could, which is about different aspects of adoption: domestic, international, embryonic, and foster. And the one that we came away with was we were faced with the absolute need in our specific city. Um, our city is the greatest. We have the greatest need here in Los Angeles. And we thought, well, maybe we should actually be here to meet a need instead of serve our family. So then we started considering foster care. Then I got pregnant and I had my own child. And then we kind of put it on the back burner. And then I had Wes, my second. And as soon as I was actually pregnant with him, and I had this very vivid dream that I met somebody, and he was like, well, I was adopted. And I woke up thinking, oh my gosh, I think this is a call to like not forget about this, even though my second biological child is on the way. Like, I don't think I'm allowed to turn this off and stop thinking about it. So as soon as Wes was 1, we started classes to certify for foster care, becoming foster care parents. And then we got our first placement 3 weeks after we finished. So Wes was barely 2 when we got our first placement.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
It was wild.
It was a wild ride.
I was gonna say it was wild, but it's been wild since then.
Yeah, it
Like
has.
it's
Yes.
not like that was that wild time,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
It just gets wilder.
it does.
It keeps
It does.
Even if you decertify, it stays wild, I realize.
That's when the real work begins, it feels
Yeah,
like.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So what about for you and Dan, Carolina?
So I'm going to blame you, Scott, because you and Laura were super sneaky years ago when you were starting your adoption process, and you gifted us this fantastic book, Adopted for Life. And you said, we just want our friends to understand our journey and walk with us through this journey. And here's this book. We were, of course, so excited to walk with you.
Mhm.
But as we read the book, God really started to change our hearts. And adoption was never something that we were closed off to. We just hadn't considered it.
Mhm.
And so we were really busy with our 2 kids. And so we really felt the Lord just kind of weighing heavy on our hearts for that. And so we ended up attending the Cornerstone Orphan Care Conference, getting a little bit more information. And we started a private adoption process, very, very beginning stages. So we reached out to an agency. We really appreciated their mission. And then we ended up kind of finding out that for good reason, they had some parameters that maybe weren't going to work for our family. We really were hoping to adopt a child of some sort of Latino background, being that our family is Latino, we speak Spanish. We really wanted to be able to recreate a more natural cultural family setting for a child, just because we are uniquely qualified in that way. And I
Mhm.
remember asking you, like, is it wrong that we want a little brown girl? And you were like, not at all. There's tons of them. The need is there. So that was really, we prayed about that, and that was really on our hearts. But this particular agency said, we want the biological mother to feel like their child's going to have a home regardless of their gender and their background. So God just told us to put that on hold. And in that time, we were watching the Colmerys get into foster care, and the Lord kind of switched gears on us that way. And we thought, okay, this is crazy. Here we are, our 2 sons in the process of getting their autism diagnosis, and we're figuring out treatment. We couldn't possibly take on anymore. And so we really prayed about it, and for a long time. And we started taking classes, and it took us 2 years. And it doesn't normally take that long, but that's just the pace that God had us take. And we got to a more stable place with our boys' services and their treatments, and we decided to just go for it. So we were certified. And we always thought that we would get a call right away. And it turns out we got a call like 2 months later. We were like, wait a minute, what? We thought there was a big need. And there is, but we see this recurring theme where people get certified, and then for some reason, we have all these kids out there that need homes, and we're not getting the calls. We finally got a call, and it wasn't the right fit. It was mostly like a family needing respite for a while, and we were really trying to be protective of our children,
Mm.
of our biological children, and the attachments that they would form. And so we just kind of passed on that first call. We felt terrible about that.
Mm.
We got over that, and then we got a second call from Maddie, and that's kind of how we got started.
Mm. And in the midst of that, what stood out to me about that was in the midst of entering into that process, like you had your hands full before this process,
We
right?
did.
I mean, not that like any of the rest of us don't, but like you particularly had your hands full.
We did. We had a lot of people actually really disagree with our decision.
Mm.
And
Because they thought you were already juggling too much.
we were juggling too much. I think that my family was just really protective of me and my workload already. And they were just worried that this was going to be a lot. And of course, they met Maddie, and
Mhm.
they really walked this journey with us. And how can you not be on board once you meet that sweet little child?
Yeah.
But we did have our hands full already.
Okay, so that's interesting, and we can edit this out if you don't want me to ask this question. But I think what's really interesting is you in one sense pushed through when you already really had your hands full, and even people around you were like, I don't know, like I don't know if you have the capacity to do this. At the same time, which I think encourages us sometimes to step outside of our comfort zone to
Right.
say like, hey, sometimes when we think we're full, like we might not be.
Right.
At the same time, you're both in a situation now where you're like, no, I actually am full and I'm disturbed. So there's a line there, right? Like, and I think it's sometimes foolish of us to say, there's no line there, just do whatever. Like I think that, we talk about this in my family. My wife tries to remind me of this. Like, no, there's a line there. Like the most sacrificial thing isn't always like something you actually have capacity to do. How has your family navigated that between like pushing through when you're like, we're full and this is something we need to step into, versus also recognizing our finitude and the fact that we actually do have limits, right? And I, having experienced both, I don't know, can you speak into that at all?
For sure. I think that we just kept taking steps forward, really relying on the Holy Spirit to tell us when to stop. And so there was a lot of prayer, of course, talking to other families that were doing it. And we just kept taking steps, kept taking classes, next steps. And we were waiting for God, and we were really trying to be very sensitive to his voice telling us to stop, and he just didn't. And I think that we do have to be sacrificial. Like things shouldn't be easy, things should hurt. And once you see the need, especially here in LA County, like Chrissie mentioned, the biggest foster care system in the nation, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it doesn't mean that you have to take everything on. But we thought if we can just take one, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to be really hard, and it's going to push us. But right now, we're not feeling that God is saying no. So we walked each step, and we got Maddie. We're dealing with all of that. And this is where we feel like, okay, we are overextended.
Yeah.
And so this is where we stop.
Yeah.
And as much as we'd like to do it more, we just feel that calling to
Totally.
to this is as far as we go.
No, I think there's so much wisdom there, right? It requires wisdom. It requires counsel and prayer, and there's not like a simple answer there to any of us. But I just appreciate that, because I think that even just the modeling of both of those aspects, right? I think sometimes it is important to push ourselves through. Also, I think it's sometimes really important to recognize our limits and our finitude, and to wrestle through that together. It's never quite simple one thing or the other.
If I could say something really quick about that too, I think for us, Brian kept joking like, I want another baby, when we were in the throes of getting our other kids kind of the services they needed. And my thing was like, no, please, Lord, no. But we couldn't close this stinking adoption. Like we had to stay certified. So in the back of my mind, I knew that if the Lord was like, listen, if I'm going to, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm going to hold this open for a reason.
I'm ready, but I don't want to. And there's difference. And then once we finalized Ben, I was in the throes of getting Ben and Caroline some services. And I knew that taking on more kids would do a disservice. So once you get to the point where you're doing a disservice to the children that you've been put in charge of, you have to take a good, long, hard look at what's best for your family.
Right.
And that's why we closed our certification for now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that means we reopen or not, but yeah.
There are so many hours in the day,
Yeah.
and when they're filled with,
Yeah.
at one point, visits, if you have visits with biological family, when you're filled with school and preschool and with therapies and just everyday obligations. At some point, like you said, we are supposed to be really good stewards of the children that God has placed in our home. And if pushing ourselves beyond what we can handle at that moment, then we aren't being the best stewards. In my opinion, I couldn't be a good steward of the children that I had if I took on any more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate both the ways that both of your stories model both aspects
Mhm.
of that I think is actually that's what's really helpful for us, even as a church family, right? As individuals think through these things in a way that's not simplistically like, everybody has to do X or simplistically nobody can because we're all too, whatever. Anyways, that's helpful. Thanks for letting me ask.
Mhm.
What about okay, so Chrissy, you talked a little bit about this last year and Ben finalizing and in the
Mhm.
midst of trying to get Ben and the other girls' services and everything else. What's made this year? Maybe I'll combine these questions, but what has made this year particularly challenging, and how have you seen God work
Yep.
and provide in the midst of those challenges?
Um, if we want to get like, do you want us to answer this on like a personal level? I mean, obviously you're asking about our families. So,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. In the context of your family, as opposed to like what's made it,
Right.
difficult
Okay.
generally. But
Yeah.
what's been
Okay.
particularly difficult for your family, and how have you seen God work in that?
Well, for me, the age range of my kids has been extremely hard. I've got,
Mm,
well, he was an infant when this started last March. Well, he was almost one, but still, he was napping a couple times a day. And then I had elementary kids, and then I had preschoolers, and those three
all home,
stage, yes, all home.
all
Those
trying
three
to
stages,
Zoom.
even if they're not home, it's so hard to
Totally.
navigate those three
Yeah.
stages at the same time. Um, and I had to actually sit Quinn down at one point. I think it was when Brian was ill with his tooth, and I was like, "Do you see mommy? Do you see me suffering? I
Mhm.
need help." I
Oh.
basically had to tell her, like, "You're my oldest. It is now your role to help me." And
Mm.
as soon as I told her, something in her woke up and she became what we now call her Mini Mama, and Ben calls her Mimi because he sees her as Mini Mama. But I was doing all of those roles for everybody
Mm.
from my 9-year-old below, and
Mm.
I was mothering everyone. And that was extremely hard
Mm.
under any circumstance. And then you throw behavior challenges, um, and particularly my preschoolers at the time, Livy and Caroline. I mean, preschoolers just don't do well with transitions, anyways.
Yeah.
So you throw in this giant transition where they had just settled into preschool, they had just gotten used to routine, and they were carpooling with Alina every day.
Mm.
They were getting really close to their kids and their teachers, and then boom, it's done. We're not going to see them anymore, and you don't get play dates, and we can't go to the
Mm.
park, and everything was taken. So, I mean, any child would have a problem with that, but those two girls in particular went into a spiral, and I was just like also trying to keep the baby alive, and I was also trying to keep Wes on task and help him learn how to navigate Seesaw. So I think that was the
Which is not a playground equipment.
it's not no, sorry, it's an app.
It's an app that all the kids are trying to figure out for school for their online schooling.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're a kid listening, you totally get it. But and so then I had to change gears and realize, okay, my children still need some sort of intervention. It's
Mm.
not going to be preschool anymore, but it can't just be me. They can't just sit around coloring for 6 hours a day.
Mm.
So I had to really pump up my time as an advocate. I became a full-time advocate. I was always an advocate for my children, but I was full-time. I was emailing, I was texting, I was on the phone, I was following up. And these are not short phone calls like you are on hold for 2 hours at a time.
Mm.
And people are interviewing you, and it's personal, and they ask you about your past, and then I get triggered. And it was like all of this emotional
Mm.
stuff coming up just to get my kids paid attention to so that I could tell them, listen, any preschooler would have a hard time, but these preschoolers, you have to pay attention because this is detrimental to their health and well-being.
Mm.
And it was on me and me alone to do that.
Mm.
And it's still there. Like I've gone through the hardest parts of it, but it's exhausting. Um, People are always like, "Oh, do you get enough sleep?" I was like, don't ask me that question. Like bedtime is a luxury. Like I use those hours to advocate for my kids or catch up on emails. Respite, it was unattainable and unimaginable because you've got this virus and you
Mm.
can't touch people and they can't come into your home. So it went from basically 0 to 5,000.
Yeah.
So for me, that's how it was challenging. How did I see the Lord providing? Carolina and I had been working on this event called Mosaic LA Moms, and we were going to do kind of like a respite day. And that was supposed to happen in 2020 in March.
Yeah.
And we locked down like 3 weeks before we were supposed to launch it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really devastating and really grievous to be meeting. We had a little steering committee of foster and adoptive moms. We were ready to go and we couldn't meet. So instead, we started an online Marco Polo group where we just started talking. We're like, let's just keep meeting virtually on Marco Polo. And it turned into a support group monthly. And most of our moms come, but some can't. And it's just, we've just brought in stragglers here and there through Facebook or Instagram and just or neighbors or whatever. And it's just been such a saving grace to be able to get on Marco Polo and be like, I just had the worst conversation with Medicare. And these other moms can totally relate. Or I think that's just been such a lifesaver, lifesaver. Yeah, they're those floaty things.
Yeah, you got it. It's also a candy, so it's confusing. Yeah, totally.
Also, this is a total luxury, but our house was finished in May, and we were able to move back into it. And if we didn't have the square footage we had for the privilege for Brian to work at home in his own space, and for me to not have every kid at the kitchen table, it would have been so much harder. And I just see that as like the Lord's grace. Like it felt like the worst timing to do our house when a pandemic hits, but it was also the most perfect timing because during that time we still had little things to be done in our house, and we still had contractors coming in and out every day. But they befriended our kids, and one of them was a foster parent, Andres, and he was fostering out of, I want to say Glendora, somewhere far, but he was just so down, and he figured out that I was fostering, and he watched me parent my kids, and he would always ask me questions. And Brian got to talk to him and pray with him, and it turned out he stopped going to church because he just didn't feel supported. So we don't have a close relationship with Andres anymore, but I just felt like there were like little nuggets in there where the Lord kept like using our family, even though we were so underwater with simple things, by somebody coming to fix our faucet daily. So,
I mean, and what a cool picture of how he had orchestrated that ahead of time, right? We were like, okay, I don't even know what I'm going to need, and I'm going to just providing these things, whether they're relationships, whether it's a physical space, just in the perfect timing when it feels like everything you were planning got like turned upside down, and yet in the upside down, the Lord had it like prepared where everything was going to fall.
Yeah, and
it didn't make it like easy or give you full nights of sleep necessarily, but what it was a picture of his faithfulness in the midst. I know it's been quite a year for you too, Carolina.
I was thinking about what Chrissie was saying, and it feels like manna in the wilderness. And you don't know when it's going to stop, but you're grateful for the manna of the day.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had a lot of challenges. Our children being in school usually, and now transitioning to being in home. And quickly trying to pick up the pieces and try to get a learning area set up for them. Our boys, when they're in school, they each have their own individual aid. Well, that was gone. So here I am, literally sitting between them.
You're the teacher and the aide.
I'm the
for
teacher,
both of them.
the aide, the behavior interventionist, the mom, the cook, all while trying to keep a toddler like from Zoom bombing, like she's in her diaper and I'm like trying to shoo her away. I'm like throwing toys across the room, hoping she'll go get them. But the screen is so much more interesting. And I had both boys in separate classrooms because they're a year apart. So I had headphones plugged in. They each were wearing one like earbud, and then I was wearing the other one. So I'm listening to like one kid's teacher teach in one ear, and the other kid with an earbud and his teacher teaching in my other ear. And I'm trying to keep it all straight. And I'm trying to get them to just sit because, of course, they just want to up and walk away. And they did. There were so many days where they just closed that laptop and they walked away. And it was their way of expressing, I really don't like this. This is really hard. So that was really tough. But one way that God really came through for us is that we are at a very small alternative school and we have a multi-age model. And it just so happens that this year they are in third and fourth grade, and we have a third and fourth grade pod. And I requested they be in the same class, and that was granted. And that was so huge because if I'm going to be managing Zoom for 2 kids, it's so much easier to have it just be one set of assignments. So that was a little bit of God's grace there, which I really appreciated. So not having their, one-on-one aids was so hard because I am doing all of that. But another grace was that our boys, they get applied behavioral analysis therapy, so ABA. And for some reason, our company felt that it was medically necessary to still continue to come into our homes. And so when everybody was super afraid and freaking out and they wouldn't go into homes, I felt like it was manna. And they came into our homes and they were still working with the kids. And we were so grateful for those few hours a day where we did have some reinforcements. So that was really wonderful. And it was like every day wondering, when are they going to shut this down? When are we going to go to therapy sessions on Zoom? Because that was going to be really, honestly, impossible. And thankfully, to this day, they've not stopped coming. They come and they're masked, and we're doing the best that we can. It's still very, very challenging, so hard, but that's been fantastic. Maddie's school, at some point a few months later, reopened. They decided to just limit the number of students that were in this private preschool and make sure that grownups were not entering, and just all these protocols. And so it was fantastic for her because she is someone who really needs socialization. She has some social pragmatic deficits. And although she is not outgoing or, the friendliest kid, just observing friendliness in others was really important for her. So we were really excited about that. One of the other challenges that we faced is that Dan lost his job. So his company
right
was
in the middle of this.
totally affected by the pandemic, and they were completely shut down. Their company was completely shut down. So
After months of chaotic working,
very long hours.
and then all of a sudden it's gone.
It's gone. So not only is that gone, but of course health insurance is gone. And so many families had that happen. People just lost their jobs and then they didn't access their health insurance and whatever services they had with that. We were so fortunate that we were able to get on Cobra and kind of bridge that gap. And that was really hard because on the one hand, I was worried. I'm not going to lie. I was worried. We've seen dry spells in the past with Dan and work. And so we were worried about that. But we also didn't want to not, walk in faith and enjoy that time because he was home and he was totally dedicated to the family, and we were able to tag team the 3 kids. And that was really incredible. So I wanted to balance just having that joy and that sweet time and taking that as like a family vacation locked in our homes, and just balance that. And sure enough, God's goodness, 6 weeks, he was out of work for 6 weeks and he got a new job. And a really great
such
one.
an answer to prayer.
In the middle of a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic. And
that's miraculous.
He works for a theater company. I mean, theaters are shut down.
He got hired by a theater company in the middle of a pandemic.
Oh my.
I mean, if that's not like a miracle, I don't know what is. But it was pretty incredible. So we just see God's mercy. But we don't always know what it's going to be, and we don't know how long it's going to last, and really just living in faith day by day.
Yeah. I mean, in a certain way, like job with a theater in the midst of a pandemic could be like seen as manna from heaven. And another one, you could be like, wait, how long is this going to last?
Right.
Right. And it could be a source
Right.
of stress.
Yeah.
And I mean, in some ways, like it is, and life's always that way. But I love your analogy is so great, Carolina, because each one of these instances it's manna,
Mhm.
which is different than a removal from the desert or the
Mhm.
wilderness.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. It's not this like gift that says, oh, okay, like you're in the promised land now.
Right.
It's just the day's provision.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's this prayer. It's the answer to Jesus's prayer, right? And the Lord's prayer to give us today our daily bread. Right. Just give me enough for today. And you're right. You don't know how long it's going to last, where it's going to come from next, but to see his faithfulness each step of the way reminds you that, wait, okay, I don't have to know to strive, to fight, to trust, to trust that it's going to come one way or another. Sometimes even from the ways we can at least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's beautiful to see the ways in which he has provided, that he continues to provide. I mean, I know both of you have a heart as well for, you mentioned earlier, just having a clear understanding of the reality at the same time of the need in our midst, of the ways that in which sometimes we are called to be the agents of manna, right? To be the hands and the feet that provide that for others too. Chrissie, maybe could you just shine a little bit of light on why this past year, not just for your families, but why this past year has been particularly difficult for those connected to the foster system
Mm-hmm.
generally? And I mean, I think there's so many different dynamics at work in how it affects the courts and everything else that I just don't think we think about a lot.
I mean, the first thing we have to understand is this isolation has, again, for everybody, but especially for foster families, kids in care, there's been a decline in mental health.
Mm,
When you're isolated, your thoughts are not in a place of necessarily speaking truth to yourself.
mhm,
And we've seen that because there was a small survey. It was small, but there were about 300 foster families surveyed. And they said, what is your biggest struggle in this pandemic? And they said the decline in my mental health and my kids. And the actual virus, worry about losing someone to the virus, was third.
mm,
So the decline of their mental health was first, and the virus itself was the third thing that they worried about. I mean, that kind of speaks to itself. And Carolina and I don't care for teens, but they're in such crisis, especially foster teens. Most teens in care are in facilities and group homes, which means that I mean, the staff was probably less
mm,
vigilant
yeah.
about checking in on them. I know that many of them didn't have their CASAs come see them anymore. They maybe had phone calls with them, and if they were lucky, they had FaceTime. But the CASAs, who tend to skew older, we know some young CASAs, but most of the CASAs tend to skew older, so are retirement. So retirees are told, stay home, don't go anywhere.
So for people's, so what role does a CASA play?
Right.
For
So
a foster
sorry,
kid?
I'm,
No, it's
I'm
okay.
starting
It's
to use
okay.
terms. I'm like, oh, not everybody understands.
That's all right.
So CASA is, Carolina, help me out.
It's a court-appointed special advocate.
Yes, Carolina is my. So basically, you are a volunteer who is dedicated to one child that you're assigned to, and it's your job to make sure that they get the services that they need.
And so it's like a consistent presence
Yes.
as kids are going from
Right.
Placement to
placement to
placement.
placement. There's at least some consistent presence.
Right.
But you're saying that even that consistent presence in the midst of this was
Right.
taken away.
Yes, and social workers change all the time. So they might be close to their social worker, but social workers come and go.
Got it.
And a lot of times there's not really a trust built between the social worker and the child. So the CASA is there to say, I have your back. I'm never leaving you as long as you're in care. And they do everything from, I don't know, grocery shop to take them to court appointments. They hold, they're very special. So if you are listening and you cannot take in a child, you can become a CASA. You should do some research on that, and we can connect you to I'm not going to throw down names right now, but we can connect you to
For
somebody
sure.
who will
Any of us can.
help
We
walk
know
you
a
through that.
CASA.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, because these teens are not being checked in on, they're going AWOL, and AWOL is basically leaving. They're just leaving their facility. They
Mhm.
end up back on the streets. They end up using. They end up being trafficked
Mhm.
sexually, and they're just in crisis. And sometimes, there was the suicide rate went up. It's just really tragic, and we don't see them necessarily because they're not in our physical homes within.
Mhm.
I don't think I know any mom that has a teen right now, except for maybe on social media. But they're more hidden from our view, and I think it's easier to think of foster care and how it affects our kids who are like cute and 10 and under, but we don't
Mhm.
think about those teens that this really took a toll on.
And we
Mm.
are seeing that in some situations, we have these foster families that have multiple kids, and they felt like if going back
Mhm.
to the whole idea of bandwidth, they could handle that because they were sending kids off to school, they were managing their visits and all these things. Well, the pandemic hits. These foster families, in a lot of situations, are trying to work. They're trying to balance managing school. So what we're actually seeing is that they are having a lot of behavioral issues that then foster families say, we just can't.
Mm.
And so then they're ending up in group homes.
Mm.
So they're leaving these homes because the behaviors are more than what the foster families can handle. They don't have any additional resources or support. They're ending up in group homes, and they're actually even being sent out of state because we
Mm.
just don't have the capacity here.
Mm.
So it's a domino effect.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate even just that little bit of light shined on that. I think because to what you said earlier, I think for years now, I think this has been the heart both of our church and a number of individuals that we, we can't look away from the need. We also can't solve it,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? But uh, prayerfully seeking the Lord and asking, I think for all of us, like how can I help be a part of your hands and feet? How can I be a part of the manna in
Mhm.
in a city where this is one of, if not the largest crisis, kind of humanitarian crisis our
Mhm.
city
Mhm.
faces. And so, anyway, we'll talk more. We'll do other podcasts about that. But I really just want to wrap up as we just hear um, returning to the idea of both of your stories. And as you look back on the last year, we've seen how God has provided in the midst of that. Um, my last question is just how have you seen the Lord working? What's He been teaching you? These tough times aren't all about what He teaches you. Sometimes we don't know. Some people look at me like I'm not sure. That's okay. But what have you seen Him teaching you through the midst of this last year?
Well, that's a really good question. Because on a daily basis, I just feel like my head is spinning,
Mm,
and I feel like I don't know. Like
mm,
it's all just too raw still,
yeah.
and I can't always see it. Like I'm my head's spinning, and I don't always know. But I just remember years ago, Scott, where I was having a really hard time, and I remember you asking me, besides reading the Bible and going to church, where are you getting truth spoken into your life? Like, who is speaking truth into your life? Who is giving you like life giving truth? And this idea of staying connected to other people, which is so hard to do in a pandemic, but there are ways to do it. I'm super grateful because we did start this foster adoptive mom group. Chrissie kind of got us all on Marco Polo, and that's been such a saving grace because
Mm,
we need to stay connected. We need to stay connected with people that understand us, that are going through similar things. Um, we're moms and we're busy. And so we can't always be live on a FaceTime call or on a Zoom call. But Marco Polo has been fantastic because we can just pour our hearts out, ask questions, seek resources, and everybody can just hop on, watch it whenever they can, and respond whenever they can. And that is so amazing. So I think that what I've learned is that can we do this alone? Sure, I think that we can like white knuckle it for a while,
mm,
But in the same way that God is a relational God, and how he desires to even just fellowship with himself, like this triune God that fellowships with himself, he desires to fellowship with us. He puts the Holy Spirit in us. He desires for us to fellowship with one another. And I think that it's been really important to keep that going. And then it's grown into this support group that meets monthly. And we have random people, friends of friends.
Mm.
I know someone who knows someone, and they show up, and maybe they just show up once and they let us know, I was super blessed by it. And then they move on. And I feel like in a lot of ways, we're a place of rest for them. They come, they hear stories, they get encouraged, and then we push them back out, and they're like, they can go back and do this one more day.
Yeah.
So that's been such a fantastic way that we've seen God work and teach us that we are meant to be relational. And he's given us the technology to allow us to do that. So
Mm.
even when we can't get together and play date, have play dates and just have FaceTime in person, we are to stay connected. Like we're
Mm.
not supposed to neglect the coming together. We're supposed to encourage one another to good works. And we can do that on whatever platform that we have available to us.
Mhm.
Oh, I appreciate that.
For me, I mean, this has been a really dry, barren season of grief.
Mm.
Just witnessing the multiple ways that we, as our nation, specifically is divided, has just
Mm.
caused me such sorrow, because ultimately it's our kids that suffer at the hands of the adults that can't unite.
Mm.
And that is completely out of my control. But I've realized during this season, along with everything else, it's a season of tilling the soil and tending to the roots of my faith.
Mm.
And I just kind of got this mental picture of I assume that like the fruit of God's work would be assumed and seen and called good.
Mm.
And it just hasn't. It's been misinterpreted at times. It's been, if it's an apple, it's been called a grapefruit.
Mm.
And I've really gotten my feelings hurt. Like I'm doing all this work, you guys, in the trenches, and nobody understands me. And I realized that I it's not about the fruit that I'm producing. It's about how strong my faith is in the Lord
Mm.
and his work. And it's so hard to lose sight of that when you are spinning so many plates. But the Lord has been showing me, like, during this bare and dry season, I want you to till that soil. It's time to get to work. And eventually, I know that he wants me to have a confidence that even if my fruit is misinterpreted, or someone thinks that me wearing a mask means something politically,
Mm.
I can stand confidently knowing that I'm fulfilling my calling and purpose that he has in my life.
Mm.
And it's taken me until almost a whole year of pandemic living to figure that out. And I've just started with, the stake in the ground. But
Mm.
I'm extremely, I was sharing with Brian, I'm extremely grateful for this season. And I'm realizing that my chaotic um, family, my giant family, is actually an opportunity to allow our community to serve. And people have been telling me that forever, like, of course, I want to babysit for you. It's no problem. But I've always felt this guilt and shame in asking people. And I will like rush to like make it easier. I'll get the baby down. I'll get Caroline settled. I'll put her in my bed that night so that no one disturbs anybody. And I realized like they can come into the trenches too and
Yeah.
give me some
Mhm.
respite for an hour. It's okay. Everyone's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I wasn't allowing them to serve, to be the hands and feet
Mm.
by trying to do it all. And that all it's done is made me weary and tired. And that's
Mm.
not what the Lord has for me.
Mm.
So that's what I've been learning in this season.
Thank you both. I feel like it is such a privilege. I mean, it's such a privilege for the glimpses I get into both of your lives, but I feel like it's such a privilege for us, even as a church family, to get this glimpse into the incredible, miraculous work he's been doing in your homes during a season where it probably has felt like uh, nobody's ever going to notice and nobody's like,
Mhm.
and you just totally isolate. And it echoes to me both the affirmation of the incredible work he's doing in your homes, but also the incredible work that he's been doing in homes across our city,
Mhm.
in our church family, that like he's been doing miraculous things in really quiet, secluded, isolated places this year.
Mhm.
And it's grievous in some ways. Um, but it's also very real. He's also working and transforming in so many different ways. And I feel like this conversation, I think, it just gives us a glimpse into that broadly, and also a glimpse into it specifically, and what an incredible testimony of his faithfulness and love to provide manna for the day, to not always, deliver us immediately to the promised land, to remind us of that ultimate hope we have in eternal life, but in the meantime, to know that he is going to meet us and meet the challenge of the day. I know it's this huge encouragement to me, and it's going to be a huge encouragement to everybody listening. So thank you so much for the privilege of getting to have eyes in, even just a glimpse, a tiny little glimpse into the complexity of that.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for listening. I hope that you've been as blessed by that as I have, and also encouraged by the reminders of the bits of manna that the Lord's been providing and is providing today in your home, in your life as well. So thanks for listening. We love you and we miss you, and we will see you one way or another on Sunday.